Dorothy Washington finished buttoning her navy cardigan and reached for her car keys. The familiar weight of Wednesday evening routine settling around her shoulders. Bible study at Mount Olive Baptist started at 7 sharp, and Sister Jenkins always saved her a seat in the third pew from the front, where the acoustics worked best with her hearing aids. The notification chimed on her iPhone just as she stepped onto the front porch of her modest ranch house. A banking alert. Unusual for this time of evening, but her granddaughter Keisha had been teaching her about mobile deposits and electronic transfers. Modern conveniences that made managing finances easier for a 72-year-old widow living on her teacher's pension. She tapped the screen with practiced care, squinting at the small text, despite her reading glasses. The balance displayed made no sense. Where yesterday her checking account had shown $3,847.22, now it read $247.22, a difference of $3,600. Dorothy's breath caught. She tapped refresh, hoping for a system error, but the numbers remained unchanged. Her mind immediately jumped to identity theft, those scammers Pastor Williams warned about during Sunday service, targeting elderly folks with fake phone calls and phishing emails. But as she scrolled through the transaction history, the truth revealed itself with surgical precision. 3 electronic transfers, each authorized with her own PIN and security codes, each bearing the memo, property maintenance, urgent repairs, each signed electronically by Marcus Washington, her nephew, her late husband's brother's boy, who'd been managing her property rentals for the past 2 years. Dorothy sank onto her porch steps, the evening air suddenly feeling thin. The 3 rental houses she owned, inherited from James after 43 years of marriage, provided the supplement that made her retirement comfortable. Marcus had volunteered to handle the properties after James passed, claiming his construction background and business degree made him the natural choice. "Let family handle family business, Aunt Dot," he'd said with that charming smile that reminded her so much of his father. "These property management companies just take your money. I'll do it right." She scrolled further back through her banking history patterns, emerging like storm clouds on a clear horizon. Monthly transfers she'd barely noticed, always labeled as legitimate expenses. Plumbing repairs, roof maintenance, HVAC servicing. Each authorized through the property management account Marcus had set up, each requiring her approval codes that she'd trustingly provided whenever he'd called with urgent needs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus himself, as if summoned by her discovery. "Hey, Aunt Dot. Had to handle emergency water damage at the Elm Street property. Insurance will reimburse, but needed to move fast. Thanks for approving the transfer. See you Sunday." Dorothy stared at the message, her mind processing the elaborate deception. She'd approved no such transfer today. She'd been at her weekly hair appointment with Miss Ruby, then grocery shopping at Piggly Wiggly, her phone tucked safely in her purse. Yet somehow 3 separate transactions had been authorized using her personal security information only Marcus possessed, given during their initial banking setup when she'd thought she was being responsible by ensuring family could help manage her affairs. The sound of Sister Jenkins' car horn from the driveway interrupted her spiraling thoughts, her ride to Bible study as dependable as sunrise. "Dorothy, you coming, honey?" Sister Jenkins called through her open window. "Pastor's covering Proverbs tonight. Something about trusting in the Lord and not leaning on your own understanding." Dorothy looked at her phone screen once more, at the stark evidence of betrayal displayed in cold, digital precision. Then she looked at Sister Jenkins waiting patiently in the driveway, and at Mount Olive Baptist steeple, visible through the evening sky where she'd worshipped for 47 years. "Actually, Evelyn," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt, "I need to handle something urgent tonight. Tell Pastor I'll catch up on Sunday." As Sister Jenkins drove away with a concerned wave, Dorothy returned to her living room and spread her financial documents across the dining table James had built by hand in 1983. Bank statements, property records, insurance policies, and tax returns. All the paperwork of a life carefully managed and responsibly maintained. If Marcus thought her age and recent widowhood made her vulnerable, if he believed she'd simply accept his explanations and continue trusting family over facts, he'd underestimated Dorothy Washington entirely. She'd survived integration at Central High in 1965, earned her teaching degree when few black women could afford college, raised 3 children while James worked double shifts at the steel mill, and buried her husband after watching Alzheimer's steal him piece by piece. She'd navigated decades of subtle discrimination in the classroom, fought for her students' rights, and managed a household budget that stretched every dollar into tomorrow. Marcus had picked the wrong elderly widow to victimize. Dorothy opened her laptop, a retirement gift from her daughter in Atlanta, and began documenting everything. Every suspicious transaction, every phone call where Marcus had requested security codes, every property expense that seemed inflated or unnecessary. She created spreadsheets with the systematic thoroughness that had made her an excellent mathematics teacher for 34 years. By 10 o'clock, the pattern was undeniable. Over 18 months, Marcus had systematically drained nearly $42,000 from her accounts under the guise of property maintenance and emergency repairs. Money she'd saved for her grandchildren's college funds, for medical expenses, for the dignity of independent living in her final decades. Money that was legally hers, morally hers, and practically essential for her security. Dorothy closed the laptop and walked to her bedroom, where James's photograph sat on the nightstand beside her Bible. She touched the frame gently, drawing strength from his memory. "That boy thinks he's smarter than this old woman," she whispered to the photograph. "But he forgot something important. I taught algebra for 34 years. I know how to solve problems." Tomorrow, she would begin solving this one. Thursday morning found Dorothy at First National Bank, 30 minutes before opening her leather portfolio, containing 18 months of financial records, organized with the precision that had once terrified unprepared students. The young teller, a girl who couldn't be much older than her granddaughter Keisha, directed her to the customer service desk, where Mrs. Patricia Coleman, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and professional bearing, reviewed Dorothy's documentation with growing concern. "Mrs. Washington, these transactions do appear irregular," Patricia agreed, scrolling through the electronic records on her computer screen. "The frequency and amounts suggest possible account manipulation. However, since your nephew is listed as an authorized user on your property management account, the bank's fraud protection didn't flag these transfers." Dorothy had anticipated this obstacle. "I authorized him to handle property expenses up to $500 without prior approval. These transfers are significantly larger and weren't approved by me." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "We can initiate a fraud investigation, but it may take several weeks. In the meantime, I'd recommend immediately removing his access to all your accounts." "Already done," Dorothy replied, producing the paperwork she'd completed online the previous evening. "I also want to review the security footage from the branch for the dates when these larger transfers occurred. If Marcus came in person to authorize them, that would be relevant." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, impressed by Dorothy's thoroughness. "I can arrange that review with our security department. Mrs. Washington, may I ask what your profession was before retirement?" "Mathematics teacher, Central High School, 34 years. A knowing smile crossed Patricia's face. "That explains the organization and attention to detail. Your documentation is more thorough than most attorneys provide." After completing the necessary fraud paperwork and arranging to review security footage the following day, Dorothy drove across town to inspect her rental properties personally. Something she realized with growing unease she hadn't done in over 6 months, trusting Marcus's regular reports about maintenance needs and tenant satisfaction. The first property on Elm Street, the one Marcus had claimed, suffered water damage requiring a $3,600 emergency response, showed no signs of recent repairs. Dorothy walked the perimeter, carefully noting the pristine condition of the foundation, the absence of any water stains or replacement materials. The tenant, Mrs. Foster, an elderly white woman who'd rented for 8 years, greeted Dorothy with surprise. "Mrs. Washington, how nice to see you. Marcus said you weren't feeling well lately." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "I'm feeling perfectly fine, Mrs. Foster." "Has there been any water damage recently? Any repair work done?" Mrs. Foster looked puzzled. "Water damage? No, nothing like that. The only repair we've had was Marcus fixing the back porch step about 3 months ago. Took him maybe an hour, and he had the materials in his truck already." The second property revealed similar discrepancies. According to Dorothy's records, Marcus had authorized $1,700 for roof repairs after a spring storm. The current tenant, a young black couple with twin toddlers, invited Dorothy inside for sweet tea and conversation. "Miss Dorothy," said the husband, Jerome, "we've been meaning to call you about the rent situation. Marcus said you wanted to raise it starting next month, but the amount he quoted seemed high compared to similar places." Dorothy set down her glass carefully. "What amount did Marcus quote?" "1,500, up from the 1,200 we've been paying. He said with all the improvements you've been making, the increase was justified." Dorothy's rent roll showed these tenants paying $1,400 monthly, not $1,200. Marcus had been skimming $200 from their rent payments, while threatening them with eviction if they couldn't meet his fabricated increase to $1,500. "There will be no rent increase," Dorothy said firmly. "And I need to ask you something important. How long has Marcus been collecting your rent payments?" The couple exchanged glances. "Since we moved in last year. He said you preferred cash payments to avoid bank fees." Cash payments. Untraceable, unreported income that Marcus was pocketing entirely while reporting lower rental amounts on Dorothy's tax forms. The scope of his deception was expanding beyond simple account theft into systematic embezzlement spanning multiple revenue streams. Dorothy spent the afternoon at her third property discovering similar patterns. Inflated repair costs for minor work rent skimming and fabricated maintenance emergencies. By evening, she calculated that Marcus had stolen or misdirected nearly $60,000 over 18 months through various schemes. But documentation alone wouldn't be sufficient. She needed witnesses' evidence that would stand up in court and a strategy that would recover her money while ensuring Marcus faced appropriate consequences for targeting an elderly widow. Dorothy called her daughter Brenda in Atlanta that evening, explaining the situation with clinical precision while avoiding emotional appeals that might prompt Brenda to rush home unnecessarily. "Mama, you need to call the police immediately," Brenda insisted, her voice tight with controlled anger. "This is elder abuse, plain and simple." "I will involve law enforcement," Dorothy assured her, "but I want all my evidence organized first. Marcus is smart enough to have covered some of his tracks. I need to be smarter. Do you want me to come home? I can catch a flight tomorrow." Dorothy considered this. Her daughter was a successful accountant with her own practice, and her expertise would be valuable. But something about handling this situation independently felt important, perhaps necessary for her own sense of agency. "Not yet," she decided, "but I may need your help with the financial analysis once I've gathered more evidence." Friday morning, Dorothy sat in the security office at First National Bank, watching grainy footage from the dates of the largest unauthorized transfers. In each case, Marcus had indeed visited the branch, but not to conduct legitimate business. The footage showed him lingering near the ATM area, using his phone extensively, and leaving without completing any visible transactions. "He's using the bank's Wi-Fi to access your accounts remotely," Patricia Coleman explained. "The IP address logs would show transactions originating from our location, making them appear more legitimate if anyone questioned them." Dorothy nodded, absorbing this technical sophistication. Marcus hadn't simply stolen her banking information. He'd developed a systematic approach to cover his digital tracks while maintaining plausible deniability. "Mrs. Washington," Patricia continued carefully, "I've been reviewing your nephew's financial history with the bank. He's significantly behind on his own mortgage payments and has been declined for several loan applications in recent months. People in desperate financial situations sometimes make choices they wouldn't normally consider. This information reframed Marcus's actions from opportunistic greed to desperate survival, though it didn't excuse the betrayal or reduce Dorothy's determination to seek justice. That afternoon, Dorothy visited Mount Olive Baptist, where she'd been a member for 47 years. Pastor Williams, a thoughtful man in his 50s, who'd grown up in the congregation, welcomed her into his office with genuine concern. "Sister Dorothy, you seemed troubled Wednesday evening when you missed Bible study. How can I help?" Dorothy explained the situation carefully, watching Pastor Williams' expression shift from surprise to sadness to quiet anger. "Marcus has been attending services here since he was a child," Pastor Williams said finally. "His grandmother, Sister Ruth, was one of our founding members. This betrayal hurts the entire church family." "I'm not seeking vengeance, Pastor," Dorothy clarified, "but I am seeking justice. There's a difference." Pastor Williams nodded slowly. "What do you need from the church community?" "Prayers for wisdom," Dorothy replied. "And perhaps practical support. I suspect Marcus may not be the only elderly person he's targeting. Our congregation has many seniors who might be vulnerable to similar schemes." "I'll address this during Sunday service," Pastor Williams promised. Without naming specifics, but encouraging our older members to review their financial arrangements carefully. As Dorothy prepared to leave, Pastor Williams added quietly, "Sister Dorothy, I want you to know that your response to this situation reflects the strength and dignity of your character. You're handling this crisis with remarkable grace." Dorothy smiled, feeling the weight of community support beneath her individual determination. "Pastor, my grandmother used to say that the Lord helps those who help themselves. I'm helping myself, but I'm grateful for the Lord's guidance." Saturday evening, Dorothy sat at her dining table, surrounded by organized evidence files, preparing for Monday's meeting with a civil attorney recommended by Patricia Coleman. Bank records, property inspection notes, tenant testimonies, and security footage documentation created a comprehensive case file. Her phone rang, Marcus's number displayed on the screen. Dorothy let it ring 4 times before answering, her voice calm and neutral. "Hello, Marcus." "Aunt Dot, hey. I've been meaning to call about the Elm Street property. The insurance adjuster wants to schedule a follow-up inspection next week. Can you meet him there Tuesday morning?" Dorothy's grip tightened on the phone. Even now, faced with her investigation, Marcus was continuing the fabrication about water damage that had never occurred. "Marcus," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Sunday morning at Mount Olive. Baptist felt different to Dorothy, charged with purpose beyond routine worship. She'd arrived early, settling into her usual pew as congregants filtered in with their familiar greetings and warm embraces. Sister Jenkins patted her hand with particular concern, having noticed Dorothy's absence from Wednesday Bible study, while Deacon Harris inquired about her property management business with innocent curiosity that now carried different weight. Pastor Williams delivered his sermon on Proverbs 31, the passage about a virtuous woman who considers a field and buys it and watches over the affairs of her household. Dorothy found herself listening with new attention to verses she'd heard hundreds of times, recognizing their relevance to her current situation in ways that felt almost prophetic. After service, as the congregation lingered for fellowship and fried chicken dinners served in the church hall, Dorothy noticed Marcus approaching with his characteristic smile and confident stride. He wore his best suit, the navy one his grandmother's sister Ruth had bought him for his high school graduation, and carried himself with the easy charm that had always made him popular among the church families. "Aunt Dot," he greeted her warmly, leaning down to kiss her cheek with apparent affection. "You look lovely this morning. How are you feeling?" Dorothy accepted his embrace while studying his face for signs of guilt or nervousness. She found neither, only the practiced sincerity of someone accustomed to maintaining facades under scrutiny. "I'm feeling quite well, Marcus, though I'm concerned about some financial irregularities I've discovered." His expression shifted to attentive concern without missing a beat. "What kind of irregularities? Is someone trying to scam you? These predators target elderly folks, you know. I've been worried about that." The audacity of his response, positioning himself as protector against the very crimes he'd committed, confirmed Dorothy's assessment of his calculating nature. This wasn't desperation leading to poor judgment. This was systematic manipulation with full awareness of its impact on his elderly aunt. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Dorothy suggested. "Would you mind stopping by my house this afternoon?" "Of course. I'll come by around 3. We'll get this sorted out, Aunt Dot. Don't you worry." As Marcus walked away to greet other congregants, Dorothy felt Sister Jenkins beside her, the older woman's sharp eyes tracking his departure. "That boy's been asking questions," Sister Jenkins murmured quietly, "about your finances, your properties, whether you've been having memory problems since James passed." Dorothy's attention sharpened. "What kind of questions?" "Leading ones. Suggesting maybe you're not handling business as well as you used to, planting seeds, if you know what I mean." This revelation added another dimension to Marcus's strategy. He hadn't simply stolen from Dorothy. He'd been preparing the community to view any accusations she might make as symptoms of elderly confusion or grief-related decline. "Evelyn," Dorothy said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Have any other elderly members mentioned financial problems recently? Unexpected expenses or confusing banking issues?" Sister Jenkins considered this thoughtfully. "Sister Pauline mentioned some troubles with her reverse mortgage payments, and Brother Thompson's been worried about repair costs at his rental property. Why?" Dorothy felt pieces clicking into place. Marcus's construction background and business degree, combined with his church connections and community trust, provided access to multiple elderly property owners who might not scrutinize his financial management closely. "I'll explain more later," Dorothy promised. "But for now, would you mind staying close when Marcus visits this afternoon? I might need a witness." At 3 o'clock precisely, Marcus knocked on Dorothy's front door, with the punctuality that had always impressed his grandmother. Dorothy welcomed him inside, noting how his eyes immediately scanned her living room, taking inventory of valuable items with practiced assessment. "Coffee," she offered, gesturing toward the kitchen table where she'd arranged a careful selection of financial documents. "That would be nice, thank you." As Dorothy prepared the coffee, she observed Marcus reviewing the papers she'd intentionally left visible. Bank statements from 6 months ago, property tax records, insurance policies. Nothing incriminating, but enough to suggest she was indeed experiencing the kind of confusion he'd been advertising to their church community. "Aunt Dot," he began as she served the coffee, "I see you've been trying to organize your financial records. This must be overwhelming without Uncle James to help." Dorothy sat across from him, her expression carefully neutral. "Actually, Marcus, I'm quite capable of managing my affairs. In fact, I've discovered some concerning discrepancies that I'd like to discuss with you." She opened a folder containing the complete documentation of his thefts, watching his face as recognition dawned. For the first time since entering her house, Marcus's confident demeanor wavered slightly. "I'm not sure what you think you've found," he said carefully, "but managing multiple properties can be confusing. Sometimes transactions appear irregular when you don't understand the full context." Dorothy smiled with the patience she'd perfected during decades of dealing with students who thought they could deceive her with incomplete homework or fabricated excuses. "Marcus, I taught mathematics for 34 years. I understand numbers quite clearly. For instance, I understand that $3,600 supposedly spent on water damage at the Elm Street property bought no actual repairs since no water damage occurred." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There was definitely water damage. The tenant might not have mentioned it to avoid seeming negligent. I spoke with Mrs. Foster directly. I also inspected the property personally. There has been no water damage, no emergency repairs, and no $3,600 expenditure." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his body language shifting from casual confidence to defensive calculation. "Aunt Dot, I think there might be some confusion here. Managing properties involves a lot of moving parts, and sometimes—" "Stop!" Dorothy's voice carried the authority that had commanded respect in countless classrooms. "Marcus, I have documentation of every fraudulent transaction, Every inflated repair cost, every penny you've stolen from my accounts over the past 18 months. The total is nearly $60,000. The number hung in the air between them, like an accusation that couldn't be deflected or explained away. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Dorothy watched him make calculations behind his eyes, weighing options, considering responses. "Even if there were some irregularities," he said finally, "surely we can work this out within the family. No need to involve outsiders or create a public scandal that would hurt everyone, including you." Dorothy recognized the shift to implied threats, the suggestion that pursuing justice would somehow damage her more than continued theft. It was a manipulation tactic she'd observed in students, caught cheating the attempt to make the victim responsible for the consequences of the perpetrator's actions. "Marcus," she said quietly, "tomorrow morning I'm meeting with a civil attorney to discuss recovery of the stolen funds and appropriate legal action. Tuesday morning, I'm filing a police report for elder abuse and financial fraud. This afternoon, I'm calling Sister Pauline and Brother Thompson to warn them about similar schemes targeting elderly property owners." His mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath the familial charm. "You're making a mistake, Aunt Dot. A public accusation like this will destroy my reputation, my career, my family's standing in the community." And for what? Some accounting discrepancies that can be explained and corrected. No, Marcus. What will destroy your reputation is the truth about your systematic theft from elderly relatives who trusted you. What will damage your career is your own criminal behavior. What will hurt your family is discovering that their son and father is a predator who targets vulnerable seniors. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is a mistake. You're going to regret this decision." Dorothy remained seated, her composure unshaken by his implied threat. "The only thing I regret is trusting you with access to my financial accounts. That error in judgment ends now." After Marcus left, slamming the front door with enough force to rattle the windows, Dorothy sat in her kitchen finishing her coffee while reviewing her prepared strategy C. Tomorrow's meeting with attorney Rebecca Santos would formalize the civil recovery action. Tuesday's police report would initiate criminal proceedings. And this evening's phone calls to other potential victims would begin dismantling whatever larger operation Marcus might have developed. But beyond these tactical steps, Dorothy felt the deeper satisfaction of reclaiming her agency. For months after James's death, she'd accepted well-meaning suggestions that she needed help, that managing properties and finances might be too much for a woman her age. She'd internalized doubts about her competence, wondering if grief and aging had indeed diminished her capabilities. Marcus's theft, ironically, had reminded her of her own strength. The investigation had required all the analytical skills, organizational abilities, and determined focus that had made her an excellent teacher. She wasn't a confused elderly widow who needed protection from financial predators. She was Dorothy Washington, a formidable woman fully capable of defending herself and others from those predators. Her phone rang with Sister Jenkins's distinctive number. "Dorothy, honey, I saw Marcus leaving your house looking upset. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Evelyn. In fact, everything's about to get much better." Monday morning's meeting with attorney Rebecca Santos unfolded in the downtown offices of Santos and Associates, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's bustling business district. Rebecca, a sharp-eyed Latina woman in her 40s, reviewed Dorothy's meticulously organized evidence files with obvious appreciation for their thoroughness. "Mrs. Washington, in 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen such comprehensive documentation from a client," Rebecca noted, spreading the bank records across her conference table. "Most elder abuse cases involve fragmentary evidence and confused timelines. Your materials could support both civil recovery and criminal prosecution." Dorothy sat straight in her chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "I was a mathematics teacher, Ms. Santos. I believe in showing my work." Rebecca smiled at this response before turning serious. Based on these records, we can pursue immediate asset recovery through civil litigation. Your nephew has clearly violated his fiduciary responsibilities, and the documented theft provides grounds for substantial damages beyond simple restitution. What kind of timeline are we looking at? For asset freezing and preliminary injunctions, we can move within days. Full recovery might take several months, depending on his willingness to cooperate. If he's hidden assets or spent the money, the process becomes more complex. Dorothy had anticipated this possibility. I suspect he's used the stolen funds to avoid foreclosure on his own home and possibly to fund other investments. My daughter can help trace those expenditures if necessary. Your daughter's an accountant. Yes, with her own practice in Atlanta. She's already agreed to assist with forensic financial analysis. Rebecca made notes while talking. Mrs. Washington, I have to ask, are you prepared for the family and community backlash this action might generate? Elder abuse cases involving relatives often create significant social pressure to resolve matters privately. Dorothy's expression didn't waver. Ms. Santos, my nephew has systematically stolen $60,000 from a widow living on a teacher's pension. He's likely victimizing other elderly community members as well. I'm not concerned about social pressure from people who would prioritize a thief's reputation over his victim's security. Understood. In that case, I'll file the civil action this afternoon and request immediate asset preservation orders. We'll also notify law enforcement to coordinate our efforts with their criminal investigation. After leaving the attorney's office, Dorothy drove to the police station where Detective Maria Rodriguez, a veteran investigator specializing in financial crimes against seniors, reviewed the case with professional interest. Mrs. Washington, your documentation is exceptional, Detective Rodriguez confirmed, echoing Rebecca Santos's assessment. Most victims don't realize they've been targeted until significant damage has occurred, and they rarely have such clear evidence trails. Dorothy settled into the detective's small office, noting the certificates and commendations covering the walls. Detective, I believe my nephew may be targeting other elderly property owners in our community. I'd like to provide names of potential victims. That's very helpful. Financial predators often work systematically within specific social networks where they've established trust and access. Dorothy provided the information about Sister Pauline and Brother Thompson, along with details about Marcus's pattern of asking community members about elderly relatives' financial management capabilities. We'll conduct discreet inquiries with these potential victims, Detective Rodriguez assured her. If your nephew is operating a broader scheme, additional victims strengthen the case significantly. Detective, there's something else you should know. Marcus attempted to intimidate me yesterday, suggesting that pursuing this case would somehow damage me more than him. He's also been telling community members that I'm experiencing confusion or memory problems since my husband's death. Detective Rodriguez's expression hardened. Victim intimidation and reputation attacks are common tactics in these cases. We'll document those attempts as additional evidence of criminal intent. Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected development. Dorothy was tending her small garden when a black sedan pulled into her driveway. Two men in business suits emerged, walking toward her front porch with the measured confidence of professionals accustomed to difficult conversations. Mrs. Washington. The taller man extended his hand formally. I'm David Harrison, Marcus Washington's attorney. This is my associate, Mr. Peterson. We'd like to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate misunderstanding. Dorothy removed her gardening gloves deliberately, taking time to assess these messengers before responding. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Harrison. Your client stole $60,000 from my accounts through systematic fraud. That's not a matter subject to negotiation. Harrison's practiced smile remained fixed. Mrs. Washington, we believe there may be some confusion about legitimate property management expenses and normal family financial arrangements. Rather than pursuing costly litigation that could drag on for years, we'd like to propose a reasonable settlement. What kind of settlement? My client is prepared to acknowledge certain accounting irregularities and provide restitution for any actual losses, provided this matter can be resolved privately, without damaging publicity or criminal charges. Dorothy studied the lawyer's face, recognizing the careful language designed to avoid admitting criminal wrongdoing while offering minimal compensation. How much restitution? $15,000 paid over 6 months in exchange for your agreement to discontinue all legal proceedings and public accusations. The insulting nature of this offer, 25 cents on the dollar for provable theft, confirmed Dorothy's assessment of Marcus's character. Even facing overwhelming evidence, he was still attempting to manipulate and minimize the consequences of his actions. "Mr. Harrison," Dorothy said calmly, "please inform your client that his offer is rejected. The civil action will proceed as filed, and the criminal investigation will continue without interference. If Marcus wants to minimize his legal exposure, he can surrender himself to authorities and cooperate fully with asset recovery." Harrison's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mrs. Washington, you should consider the practical realities here. Lengthy litigation is expensive and stressful, particularly for someone your age. A guaranteed settlement now might serve your interests better than uncertain court proceedings that could take years." Dorothy recognized the subtle age discrimination embedded in his argument, the suggestion that elderly people should accept reduced justice to avoid inconvenience. It was the same paternalistic attitude that had enabled Marcus's theft in the first place. "Mr. Harrison, I'm 72 years old, not 92. I have excellent health, unlimited time, and sufficient resources to pursue this matter to its conclusion. Your client gambled that an elderly widow would be too confused or intimidated to seek justice. He miscalculated." After the lawyers departed with their rejected settlement offer, Dorothy received calls from several community members who'd somehow learned about the legal proceedings. Most offered support and shared their own concerns about financial predators targeting seniors. But one call came from an unexpected source. "Mrs. Washington, this is Patricia Coleman from First National Bank. I wanted to let you know that Marcus Washington attempted to access your accounts again this morning using outdated authorization codes. Our security system flagged the attempt immediately." Dorothy's attention sharpened. What kind of access was he attempting? "He was trying to reverse some of the fraud protection measures we implemented last week. When that failed, he requested copies of your financial records, claiming he needed them for tax preparation purposes. Did you provide any information?" "Absolutely not. But Mrs. Washington, his persistence suggests he may be more desperate than your attorney's settlement offer indicated. Desperate people sometimes make poor decisions that escalate situations unnecessarily." That evening, Dorothy's phone rang with Marcus's number. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with clinical detachment. "Aunt Dot, this is getting out of hand. I know you're upset, but involving lawyers and police is destroying my family. My wife doesn't understand why you're attacking us like this. My kids are hearing rumors at school. Can't we work this out like family? Call me back, please." The emotional manipulation was transparent, portraying himself as the victim of Dorothy's unreasonable actions while ignoring his own criminal behavior. But something in his tone suggested genuine desperation beneath the calculated appeal. Dorothy called Detective Rodriguez to report both the attempted account access and the voicemail message. "Mrs. Washington, these behaviors suggest escalation," the detective warned. "When financial predators face exposure, they sometimes become unpredictable. Are you comfortable staying alone in your house, or would you prefer to stay with family temporarily?" Dorothy considered this question seriously. She felt no physical fear of Marcus, but recognized that desperate people might indeed make dangerous choices. "I'll take reasonable precautions," she decided, "but I won't be driven from my own home by a thief who's angry about facing consequences for his actions." Wednesday morning brought vindication in an unexpected form. Sister Pauline called with news that validated Dorothy's investigation and confirmed her suspicions about Marcus's broader operation. "Dorothy, honey, I followed your advice and reviewed my reverse mortgage statements. That boy has been stealing from me too. Nearly $8,000 over the past year, all approved with codes he said were necessary for processing my payments." Within hours, Brother Thompson called with similar discoveries. Marcus had manipulated the elderly man's rental property accounts, skimming funds and authorizing unnecessary repairs through the same methods he'd used to defraud Dorothy. By evening, Detective Rodriguez called with an update that transformed the case from isolated elder abuse to systematic financial predation. Mrs. Washington, we've identified 5 additional victims in your community. Combined theft totals over $200,000. Your nephew's operation was significantly larger than initially apparent. The scope of Marcus's crimes reframed Dorothy's pursuit of justice. This wasn't simply about recovering her stolen retirement funds. It was about protecting an entire community of vulnerable seniors from a predator who'd exploited their trust and social connections for systematic theft. Detective, what happens next? We're coordinating with the district attorney's office to file comprehensive charges. Multiple victims strengthen the case considerably and support more serious criminal penalties. Thursday morning, Dorothy sat in her kitchen, reading the local newspaper's front-page story about the investigation. The headline read, "Local man charged in elder abuse scheme." The article detailed Marcus's systematic theft from multiple senior citizens, the community impact of his crimes, and the investigation prompted by a retired mathematics teacher who documented the fraud with exceptional thoroughness. Dorothy smiled, recognizing the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved through patience, intelligence, and determination. Marcus had underestimated not just her individual capabilities, but the collective strength of the community he'd attempted to victimize. Her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Washington, this is Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your role in exposing this elder abuse scheme." Dorothy considered the request thoughtfully. Public attention might serve to warn other potential victims while demonstrating that elderly people could successfully defend themselves against financial predators. "I'll speak with you," she decided, "but I want to make one thing clear. This story isn't about victimization. It's about a community protecting itself through vigilance, documentation, and refusal to accept criminal behavior from anyone, regardless of family relationships." 3 months later, Dorothy Washington sat in the courthouse gallery watching Marcus accept a plea agreement that would send him to state prison for 4 years and require full restitution to all identified victims. The proceedings carried the formal weight of justice long delayed, but finally achieved as Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to their pastor, reviewed the comprehensive case that had grown from Dorothy's initial banking investigation. "Mr. Washington," Judge Williams addressed the defendant, "your systematic theft from elderly community members represents a particularly egregious breach of trust. These victims included your own aunt, family, friends, and fellow church members who had specifically relied on your construction expertise and business education to protect their financial interests." Marcus stood beside his attorney, his previous confidence replaced by hollow resignation. The confident charmer, who'd once commanded respect at Mount Olive Baptist, now appeared diminished, his carefully maintained facade stripped away by months of legal proceedings and community condemnation. The court notes that Mrs. Dorothy Washington's exceptional documentation enabled law enforcement to identify multiple victims and recover assets that might otherwise have remained hidden. Her actions protected not only herself, but an entire community of vulnerable seniors from continued predation. Dorothy felt no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall, only relief that justice had prevailed and that other potential victims were now protected. The 4-year sentence seemed appropriate rather than vindictive, sufficient to establish consequences while allowing for eventual rehabilitation. After the hearing, Detective Rodriguez approached Dorothy in the courthouse hallway, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal admiration. "Mrs. Washington, I wanted to thank you personally. In 15 years investigating financial crimes, I've never worked with a victim who provided such comprehensive evidence or showed such determination to protect others. Your case will be a model for training other investigators." Dorothy accepted this recognition with characteristic modesty. Detective, I simply applied the same analytical skills I used in the classroom for 34 years. Mathematical principles work the same way whether you're solving algebra problems or documenting financial fraud. The following week brought the final resolution Dorothy had most anticipated. Rebecca Santos called with news that asset recovery had exceeded expectations, with Marcus's forced sale of properties and liquidation of investments yielding nearly complete restitution for all victims. Mrs. Washington, your recovered funds will be deposited by Friday, including interest and damages. The total comes to approximately $78,000, significantly more than the original theft amount. And the other victims? Sister Pauline, Brother Thompson, and the 3 additional victims will receive full restitution as well. Marcus's assets were sufficient to cover all losses, plus legal fees and court costs. This outcome represented more than financial recovery. It validated Dorothy's decision to pursue justice rather than accept Marcus's insulting settlement offer. Her determination had protected not only her own retirement security, but the financial well-being of 5 other elderly community members who might otherwise have continued suffering in silence. That Sunday, Dorothy returned to Mount Olive Baptist, where the congregation welcomed her with the kind of reverence typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. Pastor Williams had requested permission to share her story as inspiration for other church members facing difficulties, and the response had been overwhelming. Sister Dorothy, Pastor Williams announced during service, has demonstrated that age brings wisdom and strength, not vulnerability. Her courage in confronting criminal behavior within our own community protects all of us and honors the biblical principle that justice delayed is justice denied. The applause that followed felt different from mere politeness. Dorothy recognized genuine respect from people who had watched her transform from victim to victor through intelligence, persistence, and moral courage. Several elderly congregation members approached afterward to thank her specifically for establishing a precedent that financial predators would face consequences regardless of family relationships or community standing. Sister Pauline embraced Dorothy with particular gratitude. Honey, if you hadn't spoken up, I'd still be losing money every month without understanding why. You saved my home, my independence, and my dignity. Brother Thompson nodded his agreement. That boy thought we were too old and confused to fight back. You proved him wrong and protected all of us. Later that week, Dorothy received an unexpected visitor. Channel 7's news reporter returned for a follow-up story about the case's resolution and its broader implications for elder abuse prevention. Mrs. Washington, your successful investigation has prompted 3 other communities to review similar cases involving financial exploitation of seniors. What advice would you give to elderly people who suspect they're being victimized? Dorothy considered her response carefully, aware that her words might influence other vulnerable seniors facing similar situations. First, trust your instincts. If financial transactions don't make sense, investigate them thoroughly. Second, document everything. Criminals rely on victims' confusion and incomplete records. Third, don't accept explanations that seem designed to discourage questions. Legitimate business arrangements can withstand scrutiny. What about family pressure to handle matters privately? Family relationships don't override criminal law, Dorothy replied firmly. Theft is theft, regardless of the perpetrator's relationship to the victim. Protecting a criminal from consequences enables future crimes against other vulnerable people. The reporter concluded by asking about Dorothy's future plans, given her newfound status as a community advocate and local celebrity. I'm returning to what I've always done, Dorothy answered. Taking care of my properties, participating in church activities, and spending time with my family. The only difference is that I'll be more vigilant about protecting myself and others from those who would exploit trust for personal gain. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, Dorothy's life had settled into a new rhythm that incorporated the lessons learned from her ordeal. She'd modernized her property management systems with enhanced security measures and professional oversight that eliminated opportunities for future manipulation. Her rental income now flowed through secure accounts with multiple authorization requirements and regular third-party auditing. More significantly, Dorothy had become an informal consultant for other elderly community members, seeking advice about financial management and fraud protection. The phone calls came regularly from seniors who'd heard about her success and wanted guidance about suspicious family members, questionable investment opportunities, or confusing banking irregularities. She'd also established a financial literacy program at Mount Olive Baptist, teaching basic fraud prevention and record-keeping skills to congregation members over 60. The monthly workshops drew standing room-only crowds and had already helped identify 2 additional attempted scams targeting church members. One evening, as Dorothy sat on her front porch reviewing property inspection reports, her daughter Brenda called from Atlanta with news that brought the story full circle. "Mama, I just heard from cousin Linda in Memphis. She said Marcus's wife has filed for divorce and is seeking custody of their children. Apparently, the financial investigation revealed gambling debts and other problems Linda didn't know about." Dorothy absorbed this information with mixed emotions. She felt no satisfaction in the dissolution of Marcus's family, recognizing that his children would bear consequences for their father's choices long into the future. "I hope Linda and the children can rebuild their lives," Dorothy said sincerely. "They're victims of Marcus's choices too, even if they weren't directly targeted by his crimes." "Mama, I have to ask, do you ever regret pursuing the case so aggressively? Some people think you could have handled it more quietly." Dorothy smiled, watching the evening light fade across her carefully maintained neighborhood. "Brenda, honey, I'm 73 years old. I don't have time for regrets about doing the right thing. If I'd handled this quietly, Marcus would still be stealing from other elderly people, and those victims would be suffering in silence." As she ended the call and prepared for her evening routine, Dorothy reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a banking alert on a Wednesday evening. She'd discovered reserves of strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed, redefined her relationship with vulnerability and aging, and established herself as a protector rather than a victim. The house around her no longer felt like the sanctuary of a widow living alone, but the headquarters of a woman fully engaged with her community and confident in her ability to navigate whatever challenges the future might bring. Dorothy Washington had learned that true security comes not from avoiding confrontation, but from facing it with preparation, principle, and persistence. Outside, the streetlights came on across the quiet neighborhood where several elderly residents now slept, more peacefully knowing that someone was watching. Someone was prepared, and someone had proven that age brings not just wisdom, but the courage to use it when justice demands action.